an occupation. I've been out of the industry for a long time, and so I did have to go through some major healing, and it took me a long time to start trusting people, and especially trusting pro-life people, because the clinic where I worked, a lot of the sidewalk people were not pleasant, and there was very graphic posters and very rude words going back and forth from us to them and so forth. But I was raised in Mobile. My dad was a pharmacist, my mother was a nurse, I'm the youngest of 5. And we grew up in a Baptist church, and we grew up actually in a Baptist school. And so it's funny that God's got me here today, because I understand that this is also a school as well. So I love how God works like that. But I grew up, when I was a little girl, I wanted to be a nurse. And my best friend, Sally, and I talked about going to nursing school together and being roommates and everything. And our dad died when I was 16 from leukemia. And then when I was 17, Sally died in a car wreck. But prior to that, when I was 12, I started drinking and smoking pot, but the whole time I still went to church, and I was even active in the GAs. If any of y'all are Baptist, you know what GAs are. So I did lead a double life for years. And of course, my parents didn't know that. I'm not going to be 12 and 13 telling them everything that I'm doing and choices that I'm making. But I'm leading up to the reason why choices were made the way they were made. And when I was 18, I got arrested for drugs in high school. And I had just gotten voted senior class favorite, so it was a big shock to the principal, and of course it was a big shock to my mother. And so that also allowed me to get a little deeper into my darkness, a little deeper into being promiscuous and drinking more and smoking and doing drugs and doing acid and cocaine and marijuana. And, you know, I just led this very dark life to where I didn't want, I remember even telling God out loud, I didn't need him anymore. I was good. I'm doing fine on my own. And at 19, I found that I was pregnant. And I knew immediately what I was going to do, because my boyfriend at the time, bless his heart, he was a good Catholic boy, and we're going to get married. And I'm like, no, we're not. Because I just knew we would end up divorced and I would be a single mom. And I also felt like I would not be a good mom. And I felt like telling my mother, you know, just the year before she bailed me out of jail, and now here I am, single, unwed, pregnant. I just knew I would be an embarrassment to her and how hard it was going to be. So I knew that I needed to make the choice of having an abortion. So 2 weeks later, I go in and have the abortion, and a friend of mine took me there, and she drove me and my boyfriend to the clinic, and she was very jovial, trying to break the darkness of it. And I couldn't express the sadness that I felt inside, because I had already made up my mind. This is what I was going to do. This is what I needed to do. And I remember going through the steps in the abortion clinic where you register, and they put you in the sub-waiting room. You're in this hospital gown with 20 other ladies holding your bag full of clothes, and then they lead you to the procedure room. And in the procedure room, I had nitrous oxide because I get a little nervous, and I remember having it at the dentist office. And when they did dilation, of course that hurts because it is a forceful manual thing. And when the suction happened, and I felt, I'm sorry, I felt my baby being ripped out. I knew right then I made a mistake, but it was too late. And so all I could do was lay on the table and cry. And then I get sent to recovery, and then I go home. And I had friends that had abortions, but nobody talked about it. So I never knew if they felt sad, but I certainly did. And so for years, seeing a baby in a stroller and my brothers getting married and their wives getting pregnant, it was so hard. But I ended up going to nursing school, and I was working at a hotel, and it was so hard to work at the hotel and go to nursing school, so I quit the hotel. And I went to the clinic where I had my abortion because I said, I'm going to go help all these other women. This is what I'm going to do. I'm going to empower people. I know how, I just still had this darkness in me. And so I got hired on the spot, and I actually got hired to work in the procedure room, which to me was a very noble, a very grand thing that, I'm going to be very proud. I'm making a difference. I'm helping these women. And my very first day working there, we had two physicians that would fly into Mobile. One lived in Baltimore, DC area, and the other one lived in Birmingham. And this particular day was the Maryland doctor. I don't remember exactly where he was. But, because I started the clinic in 1990. So it's been a little while, and I'm a little older, so just bear with me. But I remember the very first day working in the procedure room, he had me down at his eye level. He wanted just to show me everything. He was a great educator. He wanted me to learn everything that he knew and be the best that I could possibly be. So I handed him all the equipment. I turn on the suction machine, and then I see the tissue, the blood, everything going through. And I don't really understand everything that's happening. I turn the machine off when he tells me to, and I help the lady get cleaned up. I walk her over to recovery, and then I go to the next room and the next room and the next room and go back and forth and do this for several hours that day. And at the end of the day, he high-fived me, said what a great job I did and how efficient I was. And the other doctor, I got to work with him, and they were both very proud of the hard work that I did. I was very good at what I did. I was very detailed. Patients, I would go down to the sub-waiting room and call them, and they would always say, is it going to hurt? And of course you're going to lie. Oh no, it just feels like cramps. That's all. You'll be fine. I never told them, no, you're going to feel your baby being ripped out. You can't say that because your job in the abortion clinic is to perform abortions. And everybody's on a time schedule. The doctors have flights they have to get, so everything's very fast-paced, and you've got to get back. And in my head, I had separated that it was a baby to where it's just tissue. So I would tell them it's just tissue. The babies don't feel anything. You're fine. Let's just go and get this done and over with, basically. And I remember one time I had a 12-year-old patient that the grandmother registered her in there. And she was just crying, hysterically crying, didn't want to be there, didn't want to have the abortion. And they kept telling me that I needed to hold her down. And I always felt uncomfortable holding people down because I didn't want anybody to feel like they were forced to do it. But also, with everything that's going on, you can injure yourself even more. Somehow or another, she pushed up on the stirrups and ran down the hallway with medical equipment still inside. And there's blood going everywhere, and she's screaming and crying and drawing more attention, which is the last thing anybody wants in an abortion clinic is attention. And we finally get her back to the room. We take the equipment out. She ends up going to the emergency room where they can finish the abortion. And I'll never forget that. She was 12 years old. I can't imagine my 12-year-old niece going through something like that. It's just disheartening now that I understand what's going on and what's real. And I was so good at what I did, I also got trained in the POC room. So that is product of conception. So I got trained to piece together the products of the abortions to make sure all the pieces are there, because that was also for the health of the woman, because we didn't want her to leave with pieces of the procedures, what we would call it, still left in her, because that can cause infections and so forth. And we would go through and, piece everything together. And I remember one day we had twins. And so I had to go through and make sure there's 2 spines, 2 skulls, 4 arms, 4 legs. And it hit me hard because my brothers are twins. And it just, and as many times as I did it, I never had more than a single tissue to go through and piece together. So I remember that was very difficult. To this day, there's still things that remind me of that. And I know I'm going to have triggers sometimes, and you just kind of work through them. But what led me out is we had protesters there. And we had these protesters that some were nice. For the most part, they weren't. But on this particular day, we had a priest out there and another lady. They were being good. But they walked off the sidewalk. And in Mobile, they had a very specific law against the protesting on where they can walk. And so somebody was complaining about them being on the grass. So the administrator was like, we're calling the police, we're having them arrested. So the police show up. She refuses to sign the paper to have them arrested. Well, me being the Billy going, yes, I'll do it, yes. And so I signed the arrest papers, which means I had to go to court, which means I was all in the news and in the newspapers and everything, which I was not prepared for at all. And so that was bringing attention to the clinic. The administrator did not like that, so that started distancing her from me. And the clinic, when you work it in there, it becomes your family, because nobody else understands what you're doing. Nobody understands the work that you're doing. And we would have pizza parties in the procedure room, and there's blood on the floor, and we would still do stuff around the POC containers and everything. And it was just a fact of life. It was our normal to be around that kind of environment. So you just become very numb. And so when everybody started distancing themselves, it really hurt, because I was like, I'm really good at what I do. I did what you told me to. And I thought I was, being this great pro-choice person and making these wonderful choices for the clinic. And so with all that tension, I left. And I ended up quitting nursing school, never became a nurse. And fast forward though, a friend of mine in 2001 invited me to go to church with her on Wednesday night to do the 7 deadly sins. So my joke was, yes, I'll go. I'll make sure I'm doing them all right. Well, the associate pastor was leading the class, and he fascinated me. And I went the next week and the next week and the next week. And being Baptist, I grew up with the King James Version Bibles. I learned Bible verses every week. I have all of that knowledge. And but I always had a hard time understanding it. So I called that associate pastor. He suggested the New King James Version, a study life application Bible. So I got that. That helped a lot. So I got involved in church. In 2003, I completely gave my life up to the Lord. I just said, I'm done. I can't do this on my own anymore. But I still had all these things going through my head, and nobody would understand. So I told very few people at church, my dark secret. And I would always say I had an abortion, but I told less people that I actually worked in the clinic, because nobody's going to get that. And in 2011, I actually got sent to Costa Rica to lead a vacation Bible school with my church, because over the course of being in church, I found out that I was actually good in children's ministry. And so that particular summer, I'm in Costa Rica, we're in this beautiful church, and have all these beautiful kids there, and I just felt this shell just completely break and just fall to the ground. And I felt God saying, of all of the babies you took, I'm giving back tenfold to you to teach them about Christ and redemption. And I'm like, oh, this is great, but what do I do with this? I don't know what to do with this. So I still got involved in church more and children's ministry. And the next year I got sent back to Costa Rica. Luckily there's interpreters, because I don't speak Spanish. So this is always a God thing that he lines up. The next year, there was a girl in our group who volunteers in the pro-life world. So she mentioned a couple of times about doing things in the pro-life in Mobile, and I'm just like, I think I need to talk to her. But I was also not ready, and I was scared because I didn't know who I could trust with my secrets and everything, because I didn't want to be judged, and I definitely didn't want to be shunned from the church. And so after a few months, I sent her a message, and I just said, hey, Amanda, this is who I am, not to scare you or anything, but I need some help. And I don't know who to turn to. And she had a friend of hers that was leading Surrendering the Secret workshop, which is for post-abortion women that have had their own abortion. It's a healing workshop to go through. And the girl's name that led or facilitated that is Jennifer Lopez. So I got in touch with Jennifer, and that took me about 3 or 4 months to have the courage for that. And I went through that workshop, and there was this great, beautiful healing from that. And during that time, one of the things that she had us do was to pray about our own abortion, to pray, because I wanted to know, was it a boy, was it a girl? I wanted to know these things, and I prayed and I prayed and I prayed so hard, and God revealed to me that I have a son in heaven, and his name is Anthony. And I know it sounds weird, but God does speak to us when you ask for his will. He does answer you. And so Jennifer then asked me if I knew about Abby Johnson, and I had no idea who Abby was. And so she introduced me to Abby, and in 2014, I did Surrendering the Secret another time because I'm kind of stubborn and need a little help in healing, I guess. And Abby also sent me to a healing retreat. So I got to meet women that got me, that understood what I saw, what I experienced, and that was life-changing for me. There was women in Los Angeles and different parts in Louisiana and Maryland, and we met each other, and we come together. One of the things that Abby had us do was to think about the number of abortions that we were part of. And that was a really hard fact, because it made me start thinking about the days we had abortion, approximately the number of patients we saw and everything. And it came up to where I assisted in over 5,000 abortions. And that's something that I can't change. It's part of who I am. But I know those babies are in heaven. And I know that when I get there, I'm going to see those babies too. The clinic I worked for is now shut down, and it was called the Ladies Center when I worked there, but now it's called Claire's Hope, and they use it as a pro-life training facility. So if any of y'all have never been, or Google it and look it up, it's great information. And but in there, and then there were none. Abby's ministry has brought so much healing, and I've gone through several healing retreats. And we all keep in touch with each other. They have a therapist that we can call and text and talk to and everything. And it's beautiful. The first time I went through Surrendering the Secret, about 6-7 months after the fact, I went over to my mom's house. And I sat down with her and I told her that I needed to talk to her. And I just felt like I needed to tell her about my own abortion. And so I did, and she even said it was the summer of 1987. And I said, yeah, how did you know? She said, you changed then. And I said, why didn't you ever say anything? She said, I respected your secret. And she says, why didn't you ever say anything to me? I said, I didn't know how you would react to it. So that was a very healing and beautiful thing between my mom and I. And, to where we were able to pray together and do our own healing with things. And I'm so sorry, I'm trying not to cry, but it gets a little emotional. But this ministry has just been such a blessing. And I'm so glad that Abby has it for different walks in life, different people, that there's different ways in the clinic that affect people differently. You can work in the POC room, procedure room, the receptionist, the lab, the custodial. You're still around abortion. The security, you're around abortion. You're around that darkness. And for those of y'all that do the sidewalk advocates, I just want to say thank you for doing it with love and doing it with prayer, because that's what changes. The people that show up with those horrible posters and verbal screaming and everything, that doesn't help. That shuts us down. That just makes us go, see how they act? Is that what you want to be a part of? And we're coming here, we're going to take care of you. We're going to protect you. You don't have to hear that. You don't have to be around that. And it's true. And so many times that we would tell people, come to the side door and we'll escort you in, and you don't have to hear this. You don't have to do that. But when you're inside the abortion clinic too, there's no light in there. There's no truth in there. Their job, and their only job that they have, is to go ahead with the abortion and move on to the next patient. And the first day that I worked there, I remember going home, and even though I wore gloves, I could still see the blood on my hands. And I remember going to the bathroom sink at my mom's house and just washing my hands like 500 times. And I just could never get them clean enough. And I now know that I never can, but God can. And God has cleansed these hands. And all I think about now is I still have healing to do. You know, even though I was in the abortion clinic a long time ago, but there's still things that trigger, there's still thoughts, and there's still things that I battle. But I know that I'm saved, and I'm standing here today because of the redemption and the blood of Jesus Christ. And I still look at my hands sometimes, and I see things. But I can look now and see life. I can see creation. Like my mom died a few months ago, so these hands got to love her as she passed into the next life. These hands have held my nieces and nephews when they were babies. These hands have helped the homeless. I fed the homeless. And these hands now love. God created us in his image. God didn't make mistakes. So when these doctors or the clinics say the baby's going to be born with Downs or without a limb or what have you, there is nothing wrong with that person. That person is still worthy of life. We're created in God's image. And I'm going to repeat that to myself and over again, because when God looks at us, he sees him and he sees perfection. He understands our flaws. He knows that we're broken. But I do want all of y'all right now to look at your own hands. And you think about the goodness that you can be. You can bring love out of your hands. Putting them together and praying with the rosary, however you want to pray, put your hands together and use this for God. Use this for his work, to glorify him and to save these babies. And to save the women so they don't have to go through what I went through. And nobody has to fight this alone. There's so much healing and things out there. And it's awkward to talk about Jesus sometimes. It's awkward to talk about abortion, but we have to break the silence. And we have to talk about the uncomfortableness. We have to say, you know what? You're not in this alone. It's going to be okay. But I just want to thank y'all all for being so patient and listening and while I babble and everything. But if y'all have any questions afterwards, just let me know. I'm an open book. Thanks.